You ever think your neighbor is just a little irritating? Think again. My honey taken right off my porch without permission by the HOA president herself. A full-blown Karen with boundaries thinner than tissue paper. And she genuinely believed she'd get away with it. I didn't call the cops. Not yet. Instead, I let the wild black bears that roam our area do what nature designed them to do. Yes, bears. You're about to hear how a petty HOA power play spiraled into a literal wildlife-led smackdown. By the time this story ends, you'll understand why sometimes the natural order handles Karen-level entitlement faster than any attorney ever could. I was sipping my morning coffee. Sunlight sliding across my backyard when I noticed the problem. My honey, my golden, syrupy lifeline, had vanished from the porch. In its place sat a smug, mocking little sticky note written in looping cursive. It's the type that screams, "I know I'm right, and you'll deal with it." It was from Carol, our HOA president. Karen Martin. She had that overly polished, pinched look that made you want to hug her and scream at her at the same time. Hair always perfectly set, pastel cardigan, pearls resting over her stern chest. "I borrowed your honey," it read. "Hope that's okay." Carol borrowed, not asked. Not even texted. Borrowed. I clenched my jaw, inhaling the faint, taunting scent still clinging to the empty jar. Every part of me wanted to march straight to her front door and confront her. Deliver a tirade so sharp it would make Shakespeare jealous. But I paused, taking in the neighborhood around me. Manicured lawns, roses, trimmed like they were sculpted, kids on scooters, adults sipping lattes on perfect porches. Everyone knew Carol. Everyone feared Carol. But they didn't know me. That's when I realized this wasn't just petty theft. It was dominance. It was a message. A declaration. I run this block and you will obey. My pulse settled into something cold and deliberate. I couldn't just reclaim my honey. I had to give her a lesson she'd never forget. I closed my eyes, thinking of the woods behind my backyard dense with firs and maples. Home to the black bears that wandered through from time to time. Eyes glinting like wet onyx at dawn. Massive paws leaving deep prints in the mud. Not dangerous if respected, but extremely persuasive. A plan formed. A slow grin crept onto my face, just as Carol strutted past her mailbox in a crisp floral dress. Oblivious to the chaos she'd invited, I whispered, "Let's see how polite you can stay when nature handles things." I spent the next hour scouting my backyard, moving with the precision of someone who had nothing left to lose. The bears weren't pets, but they were predictable creatures of habit. I knew their favorite berry patches, the quiet trails they padded along, even the way they paused when a fox darted by. I didn't need threats, weapons, or yelling, just strategy. I grabbed a stick, smeared a tiny bit of decoy honey on it, and placed it at the edge of the forest. Not my real honey, my actual supply was tucked safely in the shed, a backup jar in case things went sideways. I checked my phone. No messages from Carol. She hadn't noticed anything. She was floating in her bubble of arrogance, just like always. Then she appeared, clipping her manicured nails while walking past my fence, humming a tune like she owned the universe. My pulse kicked. This was the moment. I stepped onto the porch, leaning casually on the railing as she neared the mailbox. Her gaze flicked toward me, polite surprise, like, "Oh, he's outside." How quaint. "Morning, Carol," I said, voice calm. She gave a tight smile, one that never touched her eyes. "Morning. Borrowing honey again?" She teased, tilting her head like a cat sizing up a mouse. I nodded slowly. "Actually, it's a bit more complicated. I think you'll want to look behind you." She turned. Her eyes widened. "Is that?" I smirked. That's all it took. From the shadows of the trees, the bears emerged, lumbering, majestic fur shimmering in the sunlight, muscles rolling with every step. Carol froze, heels sinking slightly into the dirt, arms flapping helplessly. Time slowed. Pure terror lit her eyes, the kind no HOA warning letter could ever create. One bear sniffed the air, spotted the honey decoy, and moved toward it. Carol squeaked like a broken whistle. "Oh my God, someone call animal control." Her knees buckled, and she stumbled backward, her pristine cardigan snagging on a branch. I stayed on the porch, perfectly calm, letting her fear settle deep. I didn't step in. I didn't have to. Nature had already taken my side, and as she screamed, I whispered, "That's how you respect property." The bears delivered the lesson for minnow yelling necessary. And just like that, Carol understood. Control on this block didn't belong to her anymore. The aftermath. It hit the neighborhood like a freight train. Word spread faster than I ever imagined. Within an hour, neighbors were scattered across their lawns, whispering, phones raised, recording every second. Carol's once perfect floral dress was shredded, streaked with dirt and sap. And she stood trembling, mumbling about bear attacks and irresponsible behavior. Her pearl necklace had snapped, dangling crookedly, swaying with each shaky breath. I stayed back, leaning on my porch railing, sipping my coffee like it was any normal morning. The adrenaline still buzzed through me, my pulse thudding in my ears. Watching the chaos swirl around Carol felt oddly satisfying. Some neighbors whispered, some snickered behind hands, others stared in shock. I could feel the shift fear and respect weaving together, settling over her like an invisible crown of consequences. Carol looked lost. She called animal control, but the dispatcher sounded doubtful, and no one rushed to help. By the time a truck trundled in, the bears had already vanished, slipping into the trees like drifting shadows. Her complaints fell flat, ignored, leaving her sputtering in the mess she created. Ooh. The HOA committee held an emergency meeting later that week. Triggered by frantic calls from nearly every neighbor within a 3-block radius, Carol tried to twist the story, shouting about harassment and reckless endangerment, but no one bought it. I had witnesses, dozens, and everyone had footage. The video didn't lie. Carol had taken what wasn't hers, flaunted her ego, and trampled boundaries. Nature handed down the cleanest judgment imaginable. Even the local paper got involved. Neighborhood bear intervenes. HOA feud goes wild, the headline blared. I smirked when I saw her photo mud-streaked, horrified, splashed across the front. She looked absurd, a toppled caricature of authority undone by the very nature she pretended to regulate. By the end of the week, Carol slipped into silence. She stopped enforcing ridiculous rules, and HOA meetings became lighter. People laughed again, joked freely, and for the first time in ages, the block felt relaxed instead of suffocated. As for me, I reclaimed my honey the real jar, untouched, shining like gold in the sun. I opened it slowly, savoring the sweetness like victory had crystallized inside. I lifted it to my lips, and for a moment, everything felt even. The message was unmistakable. Respect boundaries, or nature will do it for you. The week after the bear incident was oddly tranquil. Carol avoided my property entirely, and the neighborhood felt brighter, as if a shared weight had been lifted off everyone's shoulders. People waved, instead of glaring. Kids shouted with joy, and even the dogs barked with less hostility. It was clear who truly set the tone, now not by force, but by consequence. I spent mornings on my porch again, watching the sunlight sparkle across my honey jars lined neatly on the shelf. I could still picture Carol's wide-eyed panic. It's the way she flailed against the chaos she provoked, and I allowed myself a small private smile. Not gloating, just relief. Relief that boundaries were respected and justice had unfolded in a way no courtroom could match. Neighbors stopped, but not for gossip. But to check in, Mr. Lopez from across the street dropped off fresh muffins, grinning. I saw the footage. Never seen anything like it. Even Mrs. Patel, usually stern, nodded as she handed me a basket of oranges. Seems the bears have a better sense of fairness than some humans, she said dryly. I laughed, feeling a rare swell of community pride, the kind that comes when order resets naturally. Carol, meanwhile, became a ghost of her old self. She still showed up to HOA meetings, but her tone was softer, careful, restrained. She spoke less. Listened more, a striking contrast to the woman who treated my honey like community property. I no longer felt vengeance. I felt something far more grounded, moral clarity. The lesson had been delivered without threats, without confrontation, beyond observation, and yet it cut deeper than any argument ever could. That night, I sat by my backyard fire pit, pine smoke drifting around me. I dipped a spoon into my honey thick. Golden Ann savored it slowly. The forest behind my home was quiet, almost approving. Each rustle a reminder that the bears still roamed, guardians of unspoken boundaries. In that moment, I understood. Entitlement fades. Respect turned by natural law endures. Sometimes the most unexpected allies remind us of truths we forget in everyday grudges. I smiled toward the silent woods. Next time someone thinks they can take what's mine, I murmured, voice steady, they'll face the consequences in their own backyard. By the following week, the aftershocks of Carol's humiliation were impossible to miss. Word spread quickly in a small. The neighborhood had changed, subtle but undeniable. Every glance and interaction now carried an unspoken acknowledgement. Carol had been checked. I noticed it in the way people sidestepped her glare, how children peeked from behind their parents when she passed, and even the mailman seemed to lengthen his route to avoid her path. Carol herself had become a study in tension. She arrived at the next HOA meeting, pearls clinking, cardigan buttoned tight, lips pursed. Her posture screamed authority, but her eyes betrayed doubt. Each word she tried to wield fell flat. The board politely ignored her suggestions. Neighbors whispered in corners, and I could hear the collective hum of disbelief whenever she attempted to assert control. She had lost her grip not by force, but by reputation, and that was far worse. It wasn't only Carol feeling the pressure. Some neighbors who had silently tolerated her petty rules for years finally found their voice. Mr. Nguyen challenged a nonsensical parking regulation. Mrs. Johnson questioned a landscaping mandate. Even children, emboldened by the story of the bears, set up lemonade stands without asking for permission. I watched all of this from my porch, a mix of amusement and satisfaction warming me. My honey hadn't simply been reclaimed. The balance of power in the neighborhood had shifted, yet the deeper lesson lingered. People had hidden resentment simmering beneath the perfectly manicured lawns, but fear had kept them silent. Carol had been the embodiment of that fear. Now her reckoning was reflected back at her. She could finally see how fragile her authority really was. And the irony of it all? Nature, impartial and silent, had accomplished what social pressure could not. Even friends from outside the neighborhood called to hear the story. Videos of the bears circling Carol had gone viral locally, a mix of horror and hilarity in every clip. I laughed at one, frozen in her mid-scream expression. Surreal, cinematic almost, yet entirely real, and justice had been served without a single raised hand. It became clear to me that control and respect are earned, never demanded. Sometimes, natural order reminds even the most entitled individuals how fragile their illusions of power truly are. Just as I thought the dust had settled, chaos reminded me it has a way of sneaking back in. A knock at my door, not Carol this time, but a neighbor I barely knew, Mrs. Daniels from 2 blocks over. Her face was frantic, hands trembling as she held up her phone. "You need to see this," she said, voice tight, eyes wide. On the screen, Carol was caught again, but now a new violation. She had been spotted sneaking into another neighbor's yard. Not just any yard, the Hendersons, known for their prized vegetable garden. But she wasn't stealing vegetables. She was swiping honey jars. My blood ran cold. The pattern was unmistakable. She hadn't learned. After the bears, after public humiliation, she was audacious enough to continue. Still, I saw an opportunity. I could intervene again, but this time with precision. The bears had been a shock tactic. Now, strategy was necessary. I spent the afternoon observing from my porch. Carol tiptoed along fences, floral dress brushing leaves, clipboard clutched like armor. Every movement screamed entitlement. Every glance suggested she was testing boundaries. Then I noticed something crucial. The Hendersons' yard was littered with the same decoy jars I had used. She was walking into her own trap. Tension coiled like a spring. I called the Hendersons, explained briefly, and they agreed to leave the lights on and film discreetly. That evening, Carol arrived, moving silently, confident, humming as if the world belonged to her. Then, from the shadows, the bears appeared. Not aggressive, not hungry, simply present. They patrolled the yard, sniffing, circling, making a clear point. Boundaries exist and they are enforced. I did not speak a word. I only watched. The fear returned instantly, sharper and more intense than before. Carol stumbled backward, jars clattering, screaming as the realization hit. She had underestimated both nature and me. And in that moment, I understood a crucial truth. Sometimes, a lesson must be repeated. Repetition is the only way entitlement fully unravels. After this second encounter, the neighborhood exhaled collectively. Carol didn't merely retreat, she vanished. HOA meetings continued without interruption, her once dominant voice reduced to silence. One Sunday morning, I watched her pack her car, pearls clinking, heels scuffing the driveway, the weight of embarrassment etched into every movement. She didn't look back. I didn't feel triumph. I felt closure. The bears, my unexpected allies, returned to their forest home, indifferent and unbothered. Occasionally, I left them small offerings of honey at the edge of the woods, a gesture of respect they always accepted. Never taking more than necessary, there was a strange rhythm to it. Human mistakes, natural correction, balance restored. It was almost poetic, seeing order reestablish itself without lawyers, fines, or threats. Neighbors approached over the following weeks, awe and gratitude shining in their eyes. "You handled that perfectly," Mr. Lopez said, handing me a small jar of honey from his own beekeeping. Even the kids waved from their bikes, laughter returning to the block like it had been missing for years. The tension that had once suffocated the street was gone. Everyone knew boundaries, and everyone understood consequences. I often reflected on it, spooning honey, sunlight catching the golden liquid, thinking how entitlement blinds even those who believe rules are on their side. Carol's arrogance had been spectacular, but her downfall wasn't cruel, it was natural order, reinforced by patience, observation, and unmistakably clear lessons. By winter, the neighborhood had transformed. We weren't just neighbors, we were a community with shared respect. A block that survived its little storm and emerged stronger. And me? I had my honey, my dignity, and a story no one would forget. Sometimes, I glanced toward the forest, imagining the black bears silently watching over us, guardians of justice in their quiet way. I smile and whisper almost reverently, entitlement can be corrected. But nature always has the final word. If that moment of justice hit home, tap like, because every stand against entitlement counts. Subscribe to Karen's Hub to catch more real-life stories of ordinary people reclaiming what's theirs. And tell me below, how would you handle a neighbor who crosses the line?